Let's look back on what our course materials illuminate about the topic of ritual and death. We have seen that death is frightening and destabilizing for the dying person and for loved ones. Dying people need to come to terms with the end of their lives and often grapple at understanding the meanings of life, death, and what might or might not follow. Surviving family members need to learn how to cope with the loss of a loved one and need to reconfigure family relationships. However, cultures vary widely in how they conceptualize death, and therefore mortuary rituals vary tremendously. One interesting difference that can be seen is whether the rituals aim to hold fast to the deceased, to memorialize, commemorate, and cherish the deceased, to keep strong the ties between the deceased and the living, or whether the rituals aim to release ties between the deceased and this life. Our course materials illustrate this contrast. First, we read Barbara Meyerhoff's chapter on A Death in Due Time, Construction of Self and Culture in Ritual Drama. This chapter reveals the key role of ritual in this Californian Jewish community in establishing the continuity of the individual across life and death and strengthening ties between the living and the dead. The people who frequented the Senior Citizens Community Center were people who had lived as youths in Eastern European small towns and fled to the U.S. to escape anti-Semitism. When they arrived in California later in life, they were conscious of the fact that their language, Yiddish, and their culture, Yiddishkeit, were disappearing quickly. As a rapidly aging group, they struggled with the loss of people close to them, pervasive loneliness, encroaching senility, and deterioration of their senses, sight, hearing, and smell, to such a degree that many struggled to hold on to a sense of themselves as being alive. They demonstrated a fierce desire to be recognized by others and to receive attention, especially from younger people who could reaffirm their sense of self and their lives. Coming together, especially for ritual celebrations attended by younger people, was a way for them to feel a continuity of self between past and present. As Meyerhoff writes, quote, lacking assurance that their way of life will continue, finding no consolation that a God would remember their name, unable to draw on their own bodies for evidence of continuity or vitality, they turn to each other as unwilling but essential witnesses to their dramas of existence. In their ceremonial lives, they created themselves, witnessed each other, proclaimed a reality of their own making. End quote. Meyerhoff's chapter focuses on Jacob Kovitz, a man who died at his 95th birthday party at the community center. He appears to have known that he was going to die then, and he arranged for a birthday party that would commemorate his life and ensure that he would be remembered for years into the future. His family was in attendance, as were many members of the local Jewish community, and speeches were given about him and his life's achievements by leaders of local and city groups. At the party, he requested that for 5 years into the future, the people gather again on his birthday and give donations to charitable Jewish causes. The week before the party, he taped an interview with relatives in which he showed that, in Meyerhoff's words, quote, he is not afraid of death, but he is tormented by confusion and disorientation. But he explains that he fights them off, remarking, I have always been a fighter. He was struggling to hold onto a continuity of self even while facing death. The last words he said on the tape were, quote, I'll never change. The people around him also collaborated in helping Jacob Kovitz achieve continuity even after death. When Mr. Kovitz was carried out of the room and his death was announced, they prayed the Kaddish, intended to, quote, send his sparks up and help open the gates for him, end quote. At the funeral, one man tossed some grass over his shoulder and later remarked, quote, this is done to show that we remember we are dust, but also that we may be reborn. A month later, the people gathered for a shloshim ceremony. It was announced that by then, Jacob had become a saint, representing a continuity of self even after death. The cake from his birthday party had been frozen, but it was thawed and eaten, commemorating his life. Meyerhoff concludes the chapter with this sentence, quote, "More perpetuation, more connection, more interdependence, more unity existed when the day was over, making the oblivion of an individual and his way of life a little less certain than anyone had thought possible that morning." End quote. Taken as a whole, the rituals fought against the obliteration of the individual and sought to maintain continuity even for years after his death. A very different approach to death can be seen in the mortuary rituals of Tibetan Buddhism, as shown in the film The Tibetan Book of the Dead. The film is set in Ladakh, northern India, where many Tibetans have settled, fleeing Chinese rule. The actual text, The Tibetan Book of the Dead, Bardo Total, was written by an Indian saint, Padma Sambhava, 1300 years ago, and he first introduced the Buddhist religion to Tibet. Buddhists believe in reincarnation, that when a life is extinguished, a new life begins, although it may be an animal or human life. Buddhists believe that through spiritual discipline over many years, the spirit can achieve enlightenment and reach nirvana, and thereby pass out of the cycle of life, death, and rebirth altogether. That cycle is known as samsara. With the ultimate goal of nirvana in mind, Buddhists strive to renounce attachments to this world, which they see as obstacles to spiritual enlightenment. The ways in which Buddhists prepare for death, then, reflect that goal of renouncing attachments. In the Buddhist tradition, for 49 days after the death of the person, the consciousness is believed to linger between this life and the next one. A monk or yogi will be invited to the home to read the Bardo Total out loud to the person. The consciousness must be counseled to release its attachment to this body and this life so that it may pass on to the next life. Several of the passages in this text reflect this goal of detachment. Quote, "Everyone who has come before you has died. Now I will abandon clinging to this body. I will abandon fear and terror." Another passage reads, quote, "You have died. The light of this world is fading completely, and the light of the next world has not yet appeared. The body has lost all feeling. This is what death is. Let yourself go." A final passage reads, "Death is now come, and you are departing from this world, but you are not the only one, as death comes to all people on earth. Be willing to release all connections to this life you have been living, and release the people with whom you have been associated. Whatever fear or terror might come to you, keep these thoughts in your consciousness and go forward. Recognize that any mental image, pictures which occur are of your own creation. Maintain that recognition, and you will achieve liberation." In the film, the yogi announces that the man who died, Paldansering, was a wild pig in his past life and might be a bird in the next one. However, if he learns to let go of his attachment to this world, he might be reborn in human form, a step closer to nirvana. 10 days after death, the body is cremated. The narrator says, quote, "Cremations in Ladakh are performed as fire offerings, in order that he may no longer cling to his former body, and so that his relatives and loved ones may release him from the bonds of their attachments to him. His body is offered to the fire." The substances that are offered with the body, butter, oil, sugar, and various grains, represent everything that is desirable and sustaining in his world. To complete this process, his possessions were donated to the monastery. The day after the cremation, his possessions were auctioned off to the village. 2 days later, his sons carry his ashes up the mountain and leave them to the elements. All of these different ritual actions, cremation of the body, the burnt offerings, the donation of his possessions, the scattering of the ashes, all symbolize detachment. Detachment of the soul from the body, and detachment of the loved ones from the person who has died. Robert Desjardins' article on liberation upon hearing voice, morality, and death in a Buddhist world is also about a community of people who are ethnically Tibetan Buddhists. They are known as the Yolmo people and live in northern Nepal. This article helps round out our understanding of Tibetan Buddhist funerary practices by giving attention to the practices of those who accompany the dying and the bereaved. Like Cindy Dale Clark, Desjardins focuses on sensory experiences, especially hearing. A thread throughout Yolmo funerary practices is the idea of liberation upon hearing. As Buddhists, the Yolmo people want to achieve a good death, by which they mean that they would be liberated from the cycle of birth, death, reincarnation, and enter nirvana, or else they would be reincarnated in a comfortable life. They believe that they can help a dying person achieve a good death by helping them detach from this world. In Desjardins' words, quote, to the point of a 0-degree desire, end quote. The Yolmo have conventional ways of attending to the dying person, which he characterizes as a, quote, modest, abiding co-presence, end quote. They gently sit with the person, provide physical comfort, speak in a low, soothing voice, and talk with them about what they should expect as they die. They believe that speaking these words transfers merit, dharma, to the dying person, which would help that person secure a good death as well. Lamas will read the Bardo Todol to the person for that reason. Bardo Todol actually means liberation upon hearing in the between. Desjardins says that the way in which the text is read also puts the dying person at ease. Quote, the vocalization of the text, he says on page 108, quote, read in sonorous, evocative ways in sync with the cadences of the human breath can be calming, extensive, end quote. In addition, liberation through hearing also applies to Yolmo ceremonial practices of consolation for the bereaved. When arriving at the home of a person recently deceased, they converse with the bereaved in a low, subdued voice. They keep the bereaved company in a practice that is translated as doing or performing consolation. Their unassuming, quiet conversations support the bereaved, but also pull them back from the abyss of grief by bringing their attention back into this world. Finally, the idea of liberation upon hearing applies at the funerary rites. A type of prayer called mani is chanted. Since these prayers are offered for all living beings, they are meritorious and they transfer merit to the person who has died. Tens of people will gather and perform these prayers for hours at a stretch. They are call and response prayers, as the Lama says a line which is followed by a refrain by the group, most of whom are women. The sonorous properties of the Mani prayers are also important since they evoke liberation. In Desjardins' words, quote, their voices generate a melodic line that rises up, soaring toward higher, purer realms, parallel to the intended elevation of the consciousness of the deceased, end quote. For the bereaved, these rhythmic, melodious, sustained, collective voices are also important. They pull the bereaved out of drowning in grief by gently pointing to, in Desjardins' words, quote, the continuation of life and of sustained creative and karmic generation, end quote. Finally, the film Death and Dying in Varanasi displays attitudes and practices regarding death similar to those found in Tibetan Buddhism. This is not surprising given the fact that Siddhartha Gautama, the person who is known as the Buddha and the founder of Buddhist thought, was born a Hindu in northern India. In Hinduism, as in Buddhism, a living being is thought to live within the samsara cycle of birth, death, and reincarnation. As we've seen in both Buddhism and Hinduism, there is a pathway for people to pass out of the cycle of samsara and enter a blessed state. In Buddhism, this is often referred to as nirvana, while in Hinduism, the word moksha is more often used. The film translated the term as heaven, and it is conceived of as a blessed state without suffering. Hindus believe that the river Ganges is sacred, and that if a person dies in the Ganges or has water from the river sprinkled on them in their dying moments, or if they die in Varanasi, they will pass out of the cycle of reincarnation and enter moksha. Consequently, Varanasi has become a center for Hindu death and dying. Most families in the city earn their living through attending to the dying and the dead, or to the people who visit the city on pilgrimage. The city has many hospice centers where people come to live out their final days. As we see in the film, people who come to die in Varanasi display a desire to let go of attachments to this world. A belief that they will surely enter heaven would ease anxieties about death. One man featured in the film, Mr. Tiwari, asked his son and daughter to bring him to the city as he believes he will soon die. He says, quote, "I asked my son to bring me so that I could spend my last days here. This is heaven. Really, it is." End quote. When the interviewer asks if he is afraid to die, he says, "No, why should I be afraid? There are temples here and the river Ganges. The city called me. It summoned me." End quote. We see relinquishment of attachments to this life expressed in the manner of hospice care. The narrator says that in the hospices, quote, "there is no attempt to prolong life. The people who are brought here do not struggle to delay death. They await it, watched over and cared for by their families." End quote. The dying do not live out their final hours in hospitals, placed on life support, nor are they administered last-ditch emergency medical treatments. We see the theme of renunciation of desire and attachments strongly in the part of the film that introduces the sannyasi, who are Hindu holy men. The sannyasi renounce attachments to all mundane things, including material possessions and family. They provide comfort to the pilgrims and those who are dying. One sannyasi featured in the film, Anand Swarup, says, quote, "The city itself teaches us that one day we will all die. Whenever you are driven by desire, you forget that you will die." End quote. The cremations carried out at the burning ghats symbolically represent release from attachments. The sacred fire tended in Varanasi is thought to release the soul from the body and send it to heaven. The body is burned and the ashes are poured into the sacred river, joining the ashes of millions of people who have gone before them.